Hey guys, Thomas the Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, and welcome to my review of The Exorcist Believer. And if you end up enjoying this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my petition to help out small YouTubers. Second and third to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly. And fourth to my Discord server, you can join, collab, and chill and do all that cool stuff. And shilling will be reminded at the end of the review. With all that out of the way, let's get into The Exorcist Believer. So I had seen the trailers for this movie, and quite frankly, when I went to go see the movie, I was fairly certain that this movie came out before. But then again, I've seen a lot of Exorcist movies, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm starting to, think that other movies are other movies within that genre now, because typically speaking they have the same general outline as one another, but this one has one difference that is, I suppose, meaningful, and I suppose we'll get to that as we go through the review. Now, one thing I did note before making this review is that as I was scrolling to get this image, I went on YouTube real quick, and I did notice that most of the people's thumbnails that were already reviewing this seemed to be in a middling state, as in to suggest that they thought that this movie was mid to low tier. Now, that is just me assuming based off the thumbnails, which, people usually try to stick their thumbnails to their general vibe of the movie. So, that was an interesting bit of after-the-fact knowledge. At any rate, let's get into the story, and let's see how fair that assessment is of this middling review. So the movie starts off in a more slow-paced opening with a pregnant woman, and she is hooked up with a photographer guy named Mr. Fielding, though we'll just call him the father of the father slash protagonist of the movie. So, they're in some location, rather. I'm not really sure where. I didn't write it in my notes over here on my right. So I'm not sure where they were. But, nonetheless, an earthquake happens. And the incident causes the wife, who is currently pregnant, to be in a state of emergency, where the father needs to choose which life will be kept, as it were. And despite his wants, which was initially the wife, he ended up getting the daughter. And that is learned significantly later in the movie, but I don't feel like this movie would warrant much of any spoilers whatsoever, but whatever. Anyway, moving right along. So we cut to the family, or what's left of it, I should rather say. And we kind of follow this girl, Angela, and so 13 years have passed, so she's, well, I would assume 13 or 14, depending if he was born relative to the day that the mom died. But I digress. So we get a little bit of her sort of fooling around with the dad. They're trying to just, live a normal life, pretty casual, all that sort of neat stuff going on. And after a bit, she goes, eventually wanting to go with an event with a friend. And we see that the father is a bit protective, which would make sense in this circumstance. But nonetheless, I gotta start writing my notes elsewhere. But anyway, point being is that the father ends up essentially doing his own stuff from time to time. We get to see a little bit of what he's about. He's like he does boxing, I should rather say. I'm not sure if he's like a professional by any means. More so that photographer, so I'm gonna assume no. But as they go to this party, which was supposed to be like one of those more secretive parties, so they were doing a thing where they were like, "Oh, we're going to this friend," but then they were like, we're gonna tell the friend to tell the other friend that we're going to the other friend's house." So to like mix and match the stories, so that the parents would get all confused, so they can go out and do whatever they were planning to do. Which apparently was do some possession stuff, or at least in accordance to like do some more I suppose godly things. I'm not really sure what I would call it, but nonetheless, it is from this point, from the next point we see them, that they indeed get possessed. We learn that they were possessed, or rather, they were out there for 3 days, and it makes it seem as if, from their point of view, that they're only gone for a few hours. So, with them returned, it is very apparent rather quickly, at least from our perspective, the audience's perspective, that these two girls are acting rather differently from when we first saw them. From movement to speech, and later clear markings and more clear signs of possession to be held later on. But it is within the earlier stages that the father is led to think that, just keep following the doctor's advice. This isn't a very godly thing. Whereas we follow this other family with the other girl you see on the lower end of the right side of the poster, who is naturally, these parents are more religious by inclination, and they reach the conclusion that she's possessed significantly earlier in the movie. Due to this transition from where she was to where she is by when she returns. So we have movement, we have little events going on that are signaling that this is very clearly not, again, average or normal or whatever you want to call it, at least for these families. So we have even a more public display with Catherine is the other girl, by the way, and making her way down the church pews and delivering some sort of speech of dialogue, which I don't remember what it was, but point being is that you're supposed to be like, oh my god, all these people are witnesses to this horrific event. And again, we see that the father is still in this state in between of whether or not he's going to believe or not. He has this neighbor who she talks to him about said belief, and in accordance, he talks about his wife and what that did to him. So this is interesting in terms of like real life and even in movies as well, because there's always that split, right, of like when something bad happens to you, you either get into religion or get out of religion. It's usually one or the exact opposite of the thing, you know? I tend to see that that is typically very typical here, so it seems to be someone who didn't have faith having being pushed in that direction after these events, that being the main protagonist, in this case the father. So after finding a passage of scars saying, reading out, "Help me," this is about the time where that level of, like, you really, I don't think, he couldn't come to any, like, level of reasonable, like, thing in reality that would lead to that outcome. So he is now too in the camp of being, as the movie implies, a believer. At least a little bit more so than he was prior. So this is where he goes to see this woman who's been a part of a previous exorcist. And she talks about, again, reinforcing that idea of belief. Seems to be a huge part of the movie, if anything. Seems to be this constant idea of what it means to believe and all of that stuff. And I can see, I think, based on this movie's ending, I think I know why. At least I'm gonna assume I know why a lot of the people's, thumbnails are middling in their little, again, thumbnails. I think, and I'll explain why that is now. I think the reason is twofold. One being is that I think for a lot of them, I think the pace in which they get possessed was a little bit on the quick side. And I will agree with that sentiment. I do believe that this movie rushes to that conclusion a little bit too quickly in accordance to what the rest of the movie offers. And the second reason I believe that this movie has that outcome of those thumbnails is the end of the movie, or rather, sort of the, I guess, the climax, as it were, rather, in the movie, where they are told that they have to pick between the two girls. Only one can be saved. And it turns out that the demon does a little trickery here, and it is choosing one girl, but how it's choosing that one girl is the trick. And we'll get a little bit more into that later on in the review. But they go to a priest. He tries to get, full permission from the church. They deny him, which, like, what the fuck? With that level of evidence and just the disparity of the situation, it's like, man, what are these church people doing? Like, how do you not lose faith after seeing that scene if you're someone who's religious? Being like, yes, we're not gonna do that thing that, that could potentially help two girls. We're just gonna let them die, I guess. I don't know. Like, what a bunch of assholes these particular religious people are. Which doesn't surprise me that much, but hey, here we are. Anyway, the families proceed to at least begin to try to do it themselves. It is not going well. The priest joins them on his own accord. That does not bode well for him. He ends up dying, getting his neck snapped, in fact. And as I proceeded to say earlier, they either the singular demon or demons plural, I'm not really sure which one it is, quite frankly, throughout the movie, is saying that they can only choose one. And at first they're trying to hold off any indication of picking one over the other, but eventually the other father of Catherine is picked, and the trick is that one was picked to die, apparently, as we see it from her point of view. It's like this watery place, and she's like dragged down, and then we see Angela wake up looking as she used to in the beginning of the movie, as if she was never even possessed in the first place. So, yeah. The police arrive. They begin to explain stuff to the police. I'm sure that'll go over poorly or middling at best. And we do see that the woman who was, by the way, during her role in this, she had her eyes like poked out. She gets visited by that girl, her daughter in the movie as well. But the movie does end with one of the daughters dying, which I do believe, again, is the second reason why the thumbnails are middling, because I suspect that a lot of reviewers are suspecting that both girls would live. And quite frankly, I'm actually going to flip that and say I'm actually in favor of this ending. However, I will still criticize the pacing that which led us there in the first place. So I'm actually, interested in the decision to have the bravery, if anything, to have it be a lose-lose situation in the end climax of a Exorcist movie. That's never been done before in terms of any Exorcist movie. So, quite frankly, that's new and refreshing in its own right. Furthermore, it really places a lot of that devil trickery on display, and as well as, if the pacing of the beginning were a little bit tighter, I do believe even further that it would have actually made this movie the best Exorcist movie, whereas as of currently, I just think it's good, actually. Not great, but good. Yes, I'm actually going to say that this movie is actually pretty good. And the reason why I say the pacing is a bit rushed is that I do think that they should have spent a bit more time in the opening getting to see both girls not possessed in the opening sequence, seeing their daily lives, and making us really want to, really connect to each of them in their own respective ways. That way, making the choice at the end that much more significant or much more harder, if at all possible. That, to me, is what would have made this movie, quite frankly, a 10 out of 10, like, mastery work. But the movie kind of rushes past the most important part of the movie, and I feel like that is the biggest crime of the movie, and I'm actually going to say that the pacing being cut as condensed as it is this movie's biggest problem, not the ending, but what leads up to the ending, and why I would actually prefer to say why I would choose to typically use a more middling thumbnail, but I only have 2 thumbnails for movie reviews, and that's between a review and more so of a rant. But I'm more positive, generally speaking, even after knowing the pacing of this movie, than negative. Like I said, I still think that this movie is good. In terms of a score, in fact, I would probably still stick with a 6 or still 7 out of 10. But again, I think this movie could have easily achieved and skimmed all the way up to that 10 out of 10 perfection level of quality if it had, again, delved into that level of pacing and have that level of payoff where it really tugs at the heartstrings and makes the fear connect to the characters, which is something I've been consistently saying about horror movies, is that, especially for people who have been seeing more and more horror movies and have gotten used to them, so many of them, what makes a horror movie really stick at this point is going to make us feeling for the horror for the character rather than in ourselves, unless we inherently have a fear, which is actually, from my understanding, not very high in the first place, unless it's like something surprisingly common, which, I'm not sure which fear would be considered common, but I digress. Anyway, that's my review of The Exorcist Believer, and if you ended up enjoying it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out the links in the description. One will head you over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers. Second and third to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly. And fourth to my Discord server you can join, collab, and chill, and do all that cool stuff for free. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye!